get this, that part is working. And I want to again formally thank you for doing your presentation and being here. Joel, you have in our short conversation, you mentioned that you're a Wisconsin native, and you've done a bit of out and about, but a graduate of St. Olaf, if I remember it correctly, and you've been with the state systems and or those kinds of things since about 2008 or so. And you're the what are they, the number 3 person, or the assistant deputy secretary for the Department of Transportation. And so welcome, and
thank you,
sir. It's all yours. And folks, I will remind you to please mute your mics, and I'll be monitoring the chats so that as questions come up, we can deal with that. And it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Nels. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. As my name is Joel Nelsisteuan. I'm the Assistant Deputy Secretary at the department. I'll just, since we're kind of meeting some of you for the first time and a bit of fellowship here, I give you a little bit of background. So I'm Joel Nelsisteuan. I was born in Trempealeau County, but grew up mostly in DeForest, Wisconsin, just north of Madison. I was at Norski. We like to joke around that even the Catholic Church was named St. Olaf's, and so a pretty strong Norwegian heritage there. I went to St. Olaf College. I studied political science. Afterwards, took a couple of years off wandering through the Twin Cities and out to Colorado to be a ski bum, and then came back to kind of start more of a career. I've worked in the state legislature as a chief of staff for 8 years. I served 4 in the minority and 4 in the majority. So that was a good experience to kind of get both perspectives. I've run a trade association for workforce development boards. I did the public outreach at UW-Whitewater, and have been at the department and in my current role since January of 2019. And I kind of do the external public facing stuff, so our government relations, legislation, stakeholder engagement, media, legal, that sort of stuff. The department itself it's a big department. We have about 3,200 employees. Our biennial budget is about over $6 billion. We, in addition to the roads and highways and bridges, we also are involved with rail, both passenger and freight, with harbors, with airports, and bike and pedestrian trails, as well as the Department of Motor Vehicles, so all the licensing and issues, license plates, and as well as the state patrol. So it's one of the largest state departments, and there's a lot to kind of keep our eye on there. But it's as I think Wendy would probably attest, it is filled with wonderful, dedicated, very competent public servants, and it's really a pleasure to work with people. I love being in a room where you're just filled and surrounded by expertise and not the smartest person in the room. So I really enjoyed that aspect. I don't really have a formal presentation, so I'm just going to be working from notes here, and I'd plan to kind of give I was asked to comment on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So I'll kind of give a brief overview, but I thought perhaps at the end of that we could reserve a bunch of time for questions and answers. That's really kind of the most enjoyable part for me, and being able to speak directly to people's questions would be great. So transportation, if you're thinking about the system as a whole, when we came in 2019, we'd been suffering from decades of disinvestment, and I'm sure as users of that system, you've you've probably seen that in the condition of our infrastructure, whether that's roadway surfaces or lack of facilities, bike ped facilities. We'd really been suffering from a lack of investment that spanned multiple governors, and so that was our biggest challenge. In the transportation funding has always been this political sticky wicket. Everybody agrees that there's need, but there really hasn't been the political will to get that, to figure out a solution and pass that solution. Fortunately, we were able to kind of thread that needle. Governor Evers made the proposal in his 1921 budget. The legislature made some changes to it, particularly in how they funded that we wanted to increase the gas tax. We thought that was the fairest, most equitable way to do it. The legislature wanted to do it through some fee increases on registration and title increases. But all in all, the funding got deployed in, I think, a good way, in that we're really looking to fix the infrastructure that we have. We need to, it's kind of a fix it first type of philosophy. And so, for the first time in really a generation, we got new, ongoing, sustainable revenue. This wasn't a backfill of bonding or a transfer from the general fund of general purpose dollars to the transportation fund. This is dedicated, ongoing revenue, and we put all of that money out into, we deployed it to fix the state's 2-lane highways throughout the state through our state highway rehab program, and then the rest of it shared with locals. It was about 465 million total increase in that budget. 320 million of that went to fix the state's existing 2-lane highways, and the remainder went to local counties, municipalities, or towns to fix their infrastructure. And so that really put us in a good position as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law has now come through, because we'd really started to study projects and get the engineering aspect of those done, so that now that we're looking at additional federal resources coming in, we have projects that are queued up and ready to be built. Overall, the bipartisan, it started out as IIJA, IIJA. Don't ask me to say what that acronym is. They've just passed, or they've just kind of returned it the bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And what the bill will do is authorize an additional 1.1 billion in new federal highway aid programs over 5 years. So when you start getting numbers that are 1.1 billion, that sounds like a lot, and it certainly is. It will go a long way, but in just for a sense of relation for that, that's about a 25% increase in funding. So I guess my message there is that it will help, and we will be as effective stewards with this funding as we can, but it's not going to change conditions overnight. That needle moves really pretty slowly, but it certainly is welcome, and will go towards some good projects. So in the news, I think it was Thursday, maybe Friday, we saw that bridge collapse in Pittsburgh, and thank goodness there were no fatalities there. The bill does dedicate funding for state bridges, and we'll have about 45 million additional over 5 years to improve Wisconsin's bridges. All told, Wisconsin has right around 14,000 bridges that carry traffic. 37% of those are state-owned, and 2% are just 2% are rated in poor condition. 63% are owned by counties, towns, municipalities, or there's some private bridges as well. and overall, about 10% of those are in poor condition. Um, we have about 1,400 state bridges that are over 50 years old. There are just about around 3,000 local bridges that are over 50 years old. These are going to be a priority area for bill funding, and we're working with local partners to dedicate almost all that money out to local partners to get their highest priority bridges fixed. I can tell you that Wisconsin's bridges are safe. They go through a regular inspection where we have bridge engineers and the snooper trucks that go under to look at bridges. We use drones to look at bridges. I think the big thing to know is that Wisconsin bridges have always been a priority to maintain the safety of those bridges. They're safe to travel. We're going to get some of the load postings off the older bridges so that they can be used as they're originally intended to use. So farm tractors or milk trucks can get to and from the farm on some of those more rural bridges. And so that'll be a big priority moving forward with this bill funding. Public transit is also a priority for our administration. Wisconsin's projected to receive just under 595 million in federal aid transit formula funding over the next 4 years. That's an increase of about 30% in the first year, and then it will increase 2% each year after. Those funds are going to be used to improve and expand public transit. And Wisconsin has about 1.2 million non-drivers, and so that's a lot of people to serve. These could be elderly people aging in place. They could be. We do a lot of work with the disability community to get them more equitable and easy access to the transit system. It could be low income families that need a way to get to that job. And so this is kind of this is an exciting area where where technology is really starting to bear some fruit. We think of transit as these fixed route bus systems and whatnot, and with shared ride and applications, and technology, we're able to kind of rationalize some different systems that provide service to people maybe who are out in the country, who aren't on one of those more urban type systems. And so that it's an area that is of course very, very important, and rightfully so is getting an increase in funding. There is a bunch of money in the bill for electric vehicles, and I've been working a lot in this space. The bill provides just under $77 million over 5 years for the deployment of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. This is exciting to me because if you look at climate change, transportation broadly writ is the number 2 carbon emitter. And so if we're going to have a meaningful impact to mitigate some of the climate change, clearly there has to be some sort of change in the transportation sphere. And electric vehicles have the ability to provide that transit that I think is important for people's socioeconomic health. Getting to where you need to go, I think it is a very important aspect. But if we can do that in a less carbon intensive way, that would be a great thing. Right now, the majority of people who have a plug-in electric vehicle, the vast majority of them do their charging at home in their garage. And that really limits the utility of that vehicle to be, it can certainly be a commuter that gets you to and from work, or around the city, or kind of limited trips. But to see greater adoption throughout all vehicle users, we really need to have a much more robust charging network. One of the biggest factors, one of the biggest hurdles that people have when they're considering purchasing an electric vehicle for themselves is what they call range anxiety. And if you have a gas-powered car, you can stop at Quick Trip or BP or wherever. You don't even have to think about it. With electric vehicles, you'll often have an app on the phone or in the car that will show you where the nearest charging infrastructure is. And there's just not as many chargers out there as there are gas pumps. So if people are going to use those, they're going to need to have more chargers.
Yeah.
So we're doing a study right now to take a look at what's been done in other states, and analyze the data to look how can we use this funding to deploy that charging facility. How do we deploy that funding to have the biggest bang for the buck? I was in the legislature when kind of the alternative fuels debate was going on about 15 years ago. Do you remember when we started hearing about ethanol and ethanol plants, and should we use corn to should we put corn into our gas tanks? And what's interesting is how different this electric vehicle adoption is, in my mind, compared to ethanol. When we're looking at ethanol, we're looking at doing different types of mandates, telling gas producers they had to blend at a certain percent, and legislation that told the car manufacturers they had to create X number of vehicles that could consume ethanol. This adoption is really being led by the market, and we're seeing manufacturers who are committing to have their fleets be 100%. GM, Ford have talked about their fleets being 100% electric by 2035. That is just a sea change difference. And so if we're going to see that, they're going to produce. They've committed. They're producing more and more electric vehicles. So we need to get those chargers out. And so right now I'm, the department, there's some legislation that's going through, and we're working with stakeholders, and kind of everybody's got their own angles on it. But it's pretty exciting to see that under the bill we'll have some fairly significant resources to kind of take that first step. Airports receive some funding. Their funding is between 66 and 75 million over those 5 years. That's about a doubling of their funding. So these are both Madison, Milwaukee, Mitchell, but also the small general aviation airports throughout the state. Those are often really important for local businesses to be able to, if they want to site outside of a major metropolitan area, big piece of local economies. The last part that I want to talk about is rail. We've been doing some good work on passenger rail. There's a line that runs from Chicago, Milwaukee, Twin Cities. The closest you get here in Madison is Columbus, which is unfortunate. But we've secured funding to do an additional. Normally that runs once a day in each direction. It's the Amtrak's Empire Builder. We've submitted for a grant and received funding to set up an extra line of service that will run just from Chicago along those stops to the Twin Cities. We call it the TCMC, and that's starting service. So we're excited about that. We've been talking with Amtrak. They've released a couple of months ago. They released a visionary plan to expand passenger rail service from Milwaukee through to Madison, and then up either to La Crosse or Eau Claire en route to the Twin Cities. So that is pretty exciting. And we've been talking with the Madison mayor and elected leaders about kind of the steps that would need to take place there. We don't have anything definitive. It's just at the beginning stages of kind of the conceptual discussion, but that's of course very exciting. Southeast Wisconsin, we have a very successful Hiawatha line that runs Milwaukee down Kenosha, Racine, and then into Chicago. Lots of economic activity along that corridor. I was just talking with an individual who's up in the structure at Molson Miller Coors, and he was saying, "Hey, why don't we have more trains running into Chicago? Like with this Omicron outbreak, the Amtrak had done a temporary service reduction, and I guess their CEO was buying their ticket, and what the gate agent told them that there's a temporary service reduction going. So you've got CEOs and living in Wisconsin using that rail service to make their commute into Chicago. We're looking right now, there are 7 round trips daily that take place, and we're working with Amtrak and some of the class 1 freight railroads to bump that service up to 8, 9, or 10 round trips. We kind of need some trackage improvements there, but we're optimistic that we're going to be able to increase that. There are some exciting kind of almost private commuter rail applications that are working their way through. So that's in terms of passenger rail, there's a number of pretty exciting things going on. I think with that, that's kind of the overview that I've got for. Oh, I should talk about the timeline of the bill. I forgot to do that. That's probably one of the most important things. So the Biden administration has done a nice job being out in the press saying, the bill is here and it's going to, improve our bridges and our roads, and certainly that's true. The rub gets to be is Congress has passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, but they haven't yet funded it. To do so, they need to pass an appropriations bill. We are very much hoping that they will pass. Until they pass this appropriation bill, we work on what's called a continuing resolution, where we work on previous year's funding levels. So to get to bill all the totals and investments that I talked about, they still have to write the check. We're hoping that they do so in February, that they pass an appropriations bill to do that. After that happens, especially the highway money is the biggest chunk of that funding. Then it'll go to the Federal Highway Administration. They'll work out their appropriation tables to kind of work out to the 4th decimal point about how that funding gets apportioned. And then once we get those apportionments, we're required by state statute to go before the state Joint Finance Committee in the legislature to present a plan on how we will spend that money. So, all these things are going to take time, and that pushes us into kind of the middle of the spring. The challenge here is that funding is based in year 1 is based on a federal fiscal year. So we've got a whole year's worth of increased funding that jumps 25%, that we have to try to get out the door and put on projects in about 6 months' time. So in terms of having the engineers get these projects ready and all the financial portions of it, this is going to be extremely challenging. So we're trying to work with with our federal elected officials and the federal administrators to give us a little bit of flexibility, because that's challenge. The longer this goes, the more difficult it becomes. And we want to be effective, because if we can get all of our money out, if the state expends all this money, which we want to do, we want to put all that money onto projects to improve roads and bridges and so on and so forth. At the end of the fiscal year, something called redistribution happens, where all those states that haven't been able to expend all their money, the federal government pulls that back in and redistributes it out to states who have used it. And over the past 4 years, we've been able to secure about 100 million in federal redistribution funding, because we've been, during the pandemic, we kept our foot on the gas. We kept all of our projects going. This last year, we had 375 construction projects. This past season, construction seasons, other states didn't do that. And so not only are our roads getting in better shape comparatively to other states, but we also have the opportunity to put the funding that they weren't able to use here in Wisconsin. The Secretary is absolutely committed that we are going to get every penny of funding out the door and onto projects, so that we'll be eligible for redistribution again. To do that, we have been working with our local partners. A lot of these projects are going to go through, are going to be, towns, cities, villages, counties are going to be big players. So a lot of the investment will be on their systems. And so we've been working with them to work to see how can we improve our processes and start collecting these projects, so that once Congress does write that check and all the steps I talked to have gone forth, we're able to hit the ground running this construction season. And the same on the state side. We are getting all of our projects marshaled up and queued up, ready to go. So once that funding increase hits, we are in the best position that we could be. So I think I've hit all of my points. That went a little bit longer than I was hoping to, but if people have questions, I'm happy to kind of have some back and forth discussion.
Well, if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourselves, and just to kind of get things going, Joel. There's been some discussion on how the roads are handling the climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as we begin to become more like southern Missouri as opposed to Ontario in terms of the roads and those kinds of things, how is the department looking at that?
Sure, that's a great question, Nels. We are looking to, I think the short way of saying that is we're looking to incorporate resiliency into our planning, to a greater factor. This has been a priority for Governor Evers. He had proposed some special funding to take a look at especially vulnerable bridges or roadways that have been subject to flooding in the past, and give us some more flexibility to build those to a higher standard to better withstand that 100-year flood, rather than the current spec of building for the 50-year high water mark. In terms of what we're doing presently at the department, these are some of the people who I am just really impressed by, is the folks who we're looking at the data and the different types of models that they have, of the climate models, so that we're adjusting what is that baseline, what's that minimum, what's that standard to which we build. And there's one model that is developed and in further development by folks at UW-Madison that that we're looking at. We're looking at the current system, and there are updates that come to it. And what we're really trying to do is do work to get it more granular so that it can be used in a so it can be used for planning, so that we can, when we're making project decisions, we can better incorporate that data, the climate model data, into our planning decisions.
I see that we have something in the chat. That someone has looked at the bridge database, and they say 500 bridges that are in poor condition. What does poor conditions mean, and is this a combination of state and county total?
Let me find my bridge stats here. So 2% of what I have in my stats are 2%, and there are different people who look. There's some people who, there's an engineering group, the acronym's escaping me, who kind of do their own road and bridge assessments. The data set that I'm looking at is from our WisDOT bridge inspection people, and they're 2% of state bridges. 2% of the state bridges are in poor condition, and 10% of the municipal bridges are in poor condition. What poor condition means is that a bridge is old, but that it's not servicing at its original load rating. There's another term that is used that sometimes you see in the media. It's called structurally deficient. That's a scary term, but it doesn't. That's not the term that we use for if a bridge is in jeopardy. Sometimes we'll use like fracture critical. That's the term you need to really look out for. The state's bridges for a long time have been an area, even in that period that I was talking about of kind of disinvestment in general in transportation. Bridges, because of their nature, have always been prioritized for spending. And so while bridges may be in poor condition, that may refer to different physical characteristics of the bridge, whether that could be the deck condition or some of the substructure that isn't in good condition. But that's not to say that because it's rated poor that it is in danger of falling down. It's more likely to mean that it is load posted, so that it's not carrying the weight. It may be load posted, so it can't carry a standard 80,000 pound semi, or that it needs lesser loads to remain to remain in service over its projected service life.
In addition to that, I think Jocelyn asked the question, how will inflation affect the highway budget process?
Oh, that's a great question. This is, we keep track of inflation. It's, as you see, materials increase. If concrete and steel cement are more expensive, asphalt is more expensive, our dollars don't go as far, and we get less. We get less project for that same amount of dollars. We keep track of what are these called? Let savings. So our engineers will estimate what they anticipate a project to cost, and then we solicit bids, and they come in, and the bids are either over or under. The vast majority of bids that we've seen, we've recognized let savings, meaning we've had enough competition on our projects that those costs have come in below what our engineers have estimated the project to cost. Other states are starting to see what they call negative let savings. That's where the costs are coming in slightly higher. We're hearing from the contracting community that some of some of their inputs are starting to increase more. So they're looking for some flexibility in their contracts to be able to account for those increases. But overall, in the last budget, we didn't have the governor and legislature didn't add new revenues in, but what we did do is put in a kind of an increase to maintain the purchasing powers. I think about a 2% increase to be able to, let's see here, it's about, I don't have it right in front of me, but it was a marginal increase so that we could maintain that purchasing power. What we didn't want to do is make this investment and immediately start backsliding on it. We need to be able to maintain our purchasing power, because we are, we've turned the condition curve is now moving in the right direction. We're getting our roads as a whole are starting to get, we've stopped the decline, and we're starting to see the condition curve moving in the right way. We don't want that to change. We're finally, after decades and decades, moving in the right direction. We can't let, we can't start backsliding at this point.
What is the likelihood that,
Go ahead.
what is the likelihood that the appropriations bill is going to pass by the same margin that the rebuild or whatever it was, the infrastructure bill passed? It's a political.
Yeah, that I don't have a good sense for. I'm confident that they will pass an appropriations bill. I think the big question that our federal folks are looking at is whether or not they split transportation out on its own, or keep it as part of the appropriations bill that funds the whole of the federal government. Frankly, from my perspective, it doesn't make a difference which mechanism they do. I'm more concerned about the timing of it. I'm confident that they will pass it. But what's really not helpful for us is when we keep going on these continuing resolutions. When we get funded for a partial year, 3 months, 6 months, that just makes it incredibly hard to plan. If you're not certain of what your revenue is going to be, it makes it hard to, are we doing 375 projects a year, or are we going to do 250 projects a year? Not being able to peg what size the program is going to be at is challenging. So that's one of the big things that we've been trying to impress upon the Federal Highways Administration, our congressional delegation, the Biden administration, is that we certainly want to see that increased bill funding, and we want to see the appropriations come as a standard year-long appropriation so that we can effectively manage it.
I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about our initiatives with the connected and autonomous vehicles?
Sure, Wendy. Yeah. And if I don't know if, with being in research and library, how closely you work with them, but CAV is they're called connected vehicles. Connected vehicles are vehicles that can talk with the infrastructure, if so equipped. They can talk with the road, or they can talk with other vehicles. And so here you think about maybe the vehicles that so that's connected vehicles. Autonomous vehicles that are vehicles that do the same, but in addition they provide a varying degree of navigation, self-driving. So here, think your Tesla. And this is really an emerging, rapidly emerging technology for which our regulatory scheme really needs to catch up. CAVs are coming. They're going to keep coming. Tesla is, of course, the been at the vanguard of this, but the major domestic and foreign manufacturers continue to incorporate greater and greater degrees of autonomy within their vehicles, and there are some inherent benefits in terms of being able to, in terms of safety, and in terms of being able to efficiently use existing infrastructure. You can get more vehicles safely on set square footage of pavement more so than you can with human drivers. So I need to caveat that and saying out into the future as these systems continue to improve and evolve. As that evolution continues, has begun and continues and accelerates, we need to have laws that look at things like issues of liability, or is a 12-year-old allowed to ride? If you have a fully autonomous vehicle, can a minor ride in there? Do you need to have a licensed driver at the controls should there be some type of problem? All of there are a host of issues that of intersection with existing law that just aren't currently built to, there's when our laws were created, CAVs were not a thing. And so what we've done at the department is to convene both an internal task force and an external task force that convenes stakeholders from all the different, from that constellation of people who work in this area, to be able to set forth and start to develop, how are we going to treat those in Wisconsin? What are other states doing? What are our leading research institutions telling us? What is the private sector doing? From a user perspective, who needs, who stands to gain from these? How do we deal with it from a law enforcement perspective? So, there's all these issues that we need to suss out. And so, over the past 3 years, we've been working on these with an eye to be able to offer some recommendations to the legislature to start drafting some legislation that will start to put some of that framework that we need to have in place.
I see in the chat that we have 2 questions. One, and Wendy's also given us a link as well. And Wendy, do you want to describe that link?
Yeah, I was just typing it up. It's a link to the various task forces that the department has. So there's one on connected autonomous vehicles and the non-driver. And so anyway, so if you're interested in the work on those external task forces, it's a link to that.
Wonderful, thank you. But Joel, the 2 questions were, do they quantify the impact of poor road conditions, such as our beloved potholes, on vehicle maintenance for Wisconsin drivers? And is there a way to measure that?
Yeah, there is. I think, I don't recall maybe it'll come to me. There is a group that does that studies, based on the overall condition of the state's roads, how much can you expect to spend on maintenance of your vehicle? And Wisconsin has traditionally been higher than normal. Just we've got those decades of disinvestment. So we've got potholes, we have winter, in a harsh winter that is hard on roadways. And so you've got these kind of combined factors that will do it. I'm trying to think here. Boy, it's not coming to me who does that, but yes, there is somebody who quantifies that. At the department, what we do is we maintain an inventory of our roadways. We use two different metrics. The one is called IRI, and that's an International Roughness Index. That's kind of the what you'd feel as a driver going over the road, how rough is a road. And then we also have a kind of one that we use at just the state level. I think it's PCA, PCR, that is a little bit more rigorous, that goes into further analysis than just that roughness index. We have, it's kind of neat because we have some vans that have all these what look like cameras mounted on them, and they're on the back and on the sides, and they're chock full of computers, and they're lasers that go, and we drive these vans around. I think every 2 years it's a 2-year cycle, and we have them on. They're just out there driving roads. These lasers are measuring and recording the down to like the square inch of the roughness or the condition of that road. We then take that data, upload it into the system, and so that you can look at a stretch of roadway and say, well, here we've got a project coming up, and for this section of roadway needs a project because here you've got some alligator cracking, and that's not terrible, but over here you have some deeper transverse cracking across there, then that's a more serious structural problem. So really it's putting data behind the decisions that are made about what type of treatment is needed for a particular section of roadway, and when do you need to do that treatment. The whole name of the game is putting the right treatment on a roadway section at the right time. And because we've got limited resources, we've got that far outstripped the demand, far outstrips the resources that we have. So we need to make some intelligent decisions about where do we get the greatest bang for the buck. And by using this database approach, we can look, and maybe that alligator cracking stayed stable in that section we talked about, but that transverse crack has gotten bigger. Well, that gives us some clues about the timing of when that project needs to get done. So we do that on our state system every 2 years. There's a system called Whistler that the locals do. There's many more local roads than state roads, so they self-report the condition of their roadways, and they kind of have a representative sample that we extrapolate to kind of make these same types of data decisions. So yeah, it's I had a chance to sit in the van and to ride with them for a little bit, and it's cool because you got one person who's driving it and two people kind of manning the computers. It reminded me of being like on a B-24 crew in World War II. People in the back were maybe being on an airline, but it was, I had, before I started working here, I had no idea that, I thought people just went out and drove the roads and said, well, there's, a bunch of potholes here. It seems pretty rough. We should do a project to fix those. But no, we use lasers to measure and analyze. So that's, I thought that was quite interesting.
You bet. Thank you. There's also a question about asking about the contribution between the state going to the local systems, such as in Madison, and the question relates to the interstate bill, or the infrastructure bill that was just passed, and how that relationship is going to change with that funding?
Sure. There's nothing specific that I can tell you at this point in terms of set dollar figures, but I can offer you a general flavor of what we see happening. And of course, this is all going to get modified to some degree by that apportionment process that I talked about that Federal Highways does, as well as we'll take this federal plan to the finance committee at the state legislature, and we're going to need their approval on it. But the our vision is to have an equitable split between the states and locals, and we want to be able to deploy this funding over the 5 years in such a way that projects that are ready get funded. Remember that window we were talking about, that shrinking window. We have to have our projects up and ready to go. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that, to be able to get that funding out the door and onto projects, that doesn't mean in year one that the funding might be a 50-50 split. Maybe in the first year, at the state, we've got a shelf of ready projects to go. So maybe the funding for a while is here, and then in years 3 and 4, the locals receive more. But at the end of this 5 years, you'll see more parity. But you'll see kind of equivalency rather between the two. But the one area that I'm pretty confident that we'll see the locals have the lion's share of the funding is on bridges. The state's bridges are in good condition. We're looking to move the preponderance of that funding over to locals, so that we see the biggest bang for the buck there. If we could get all the load postings off bridges and get them up, that could be of tremendous benefit to local communities, to the economies of local communities and sectors, agriculture, timber, tourism. Some of these core Wisconsin industries would really benefit from that type of approach.
Yeah, if I remember right, the continuing resolutions fund you as you were, not with the new funding that's coming in. So
Correct.
In essence, you're just status quo with what you had.
Correct.
Is that still the case?
We are still under FAST Act funding, the Fixing America's Surface Transportation funding. That CR, that FAST Act funding continues through February. And so that's kind of the reading the tea leaves. That's the next opportunity for Congress to pass that appropriations bill. And now, February is just around the corner, so fingers crossed.
So it's possible that the funding could be expanded beyond the 5 years of the bill to move that funding forward with the if the deadlines get pushed back too bad.
We're looking to have some additional flexibility to be able to use those year one funds to be able to obligate those past the end of the federal fiscal year. If we're stuck, in trying to get all 12 months of funding that we're getting at 25% increase, and we're trying to get those obligated and on projects in 6 months, that's incredibly challenging. And so we want to be able to have some flexibilities with that. And and thinking about past this 5-year window, I think that's at a time when there will be enough time that's gone by for these projects to occur, and there's of course going to be technological advances in the EV space and And I'm sure that we'll see another rigorous debate as we saw on this this bipartisan infrastructure law. But I don't know, I would hope that policymakers continue to appreciate the types of return that they get for the investment when they make it in infrastructure. We can do improvements for safety. So literally, with modern design standards, we can demonstrate how newer roads are safer from a geometric standpoint that saves lives. You can see the impact on the economies in areas where we're able to do the projects, and whether that's micro, on a micro scale, and maybe that's a person who has access to transit and is then able to get to a job, or it could be the macro sense where you look at the I-94 north-south that was recently completed, Milwaukee down to the state line, and you look at all of the industries, large industries popping up where you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of jobs being created all along that corridor. And I think you'll continue to see really big nameplate businesses looking to site there.
I had a discussion with some truck drivers, and they were saying that the automated systems that people are talking about simply won't work for trucks because of the responsibility that truck drivers have to adjust their loads as weather and road conditions require them to move the actual contents of the container. Have you been involved in any of those discussions?
Not at that level, Nels. I know that through our task force that's looking at CAV, that one of the first areas that there's interest from within the trucking industry, and this isn't a driver perspective. I can see why they have that perspective, and I certainly appreciate that. There's interest in the trucking industry. So think your Schneiders or these big type of trucking firms. One of the first areas that we're looking at studying is something called truck platooning, and it's where you have a lead truck and maybe that has a driver in it, or maybe each truck has a driver in it, but they are connected. They're talking to one another, so that lead truck is kind of like the locomotive of a small train, and they are they're piloting the now I'm mixing my metaphors, but they're the locomotive that's steering and where to go. They're looking at this because there's huge advantages for them for fuel savings. And that, of course, is less fuel use, less carbon impact, less pollution. But we need to understand if you've got a platoon of 5 semi trucks that are essentially working as a single unit, how does that unit interact with the rest of traffic? What's that like for a car that's driving along there? Do you need to put them in a dedicated lane? Do you need to start building your ramps differently? Does the geometry of an exit ramp have to change if that's going to be how the trucking industry wants to operate? So these are a lot of questions, but that's really where I've seen kind of the furthest development, kind of the type of automation being looked at from a freight perspective.
Okay, neat.
Nels,
Yes, please.
I have a question, and that is, do we have the workers to for the companies that are going to do the road work? If we have extra money coming out, are there people ready to actually carry out that work?
Carolyn, that's an excellent question. That has been one of those questions we've been posing to the construction industry. If you see, a 25% increase in the program, are you going to be able to handle that? Are you going to be able to do that without overtime? What's that going to do to cost? Do you have the workforce to do that? Do you have the equipment to do that? Given some of the supply chain, issues that we've seen, they assure us that they'll be able to absorb that 25% growth and be able to fully incorporate that. And in fact, they say if we can, as business people, they like long-term horizons to be able to make their business decisions. And so we talk to them on a pretty regular basis. What does a 25% increase look like? What does that mean for the cubic yards of concrete that'll get used? How many cubic yards of earthwork do we plan to have done? How much asphalt? And so we go through and we talk about the specific quantities that they can expect to see, and then they make their decisions on, do I need to buy a new paver? And we try to provide as much certainty as we can, because we understand if you're a construction company, buying a paver is $1 million question, and that's a sizable investment. But yes, from the construction industry, all things point to they fully expect to be able to handle this type of bump, and it kind of stands to reason. These jobs are the people who are out there working on highway construction. They're good jobs. They pay well, they are benefited well, and so it's an attractive job to have. Where we are looking at, that's the building side. There's the design side as well, and it's going to be challenging for us to get all of these jobs designed and through the kind of environmental process that we need to go through within project development. We spoke a little bit earlier. I don't know how many people were on early, but we look at what is our attrition rates coming up within the department, and there's going to be a lot of very senior people within the engineering division that we have that are going to be eligible for retirement. So that's a challenge. How do we deal with that? Knowledge management. The second thing is we had asked, we need to be able to fairly compensate our state engineers, and compared to the private sector, they are not compensated at the same level. Now, I would argue that there's some other benefits that come into play there, but just from a compensation perspective, we need to be able to keep attracting and retaining talented civil engineers to come work at the department. We absolutely, you have to have that to be able to deploy a safe and efficient transportation system and do it in a way where you are being prudent stewards of taxpayer money. You need to have good people designing those projects. So that is going to be something that's going to be a challenge for us. I'm confident that we'll be able to do it, but we are asking our engineers to do a lot. They've been asked to really stretch, and this is going to, especially this year one is we're going to have to make some good management decisions so that they can be successful.
One area of recruitment I hope you'll emphasize is trying to get more women into highway construction.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The division administrator who heads the engineering and project delivery division, we call it DTSD, is her name is Rebecca Burkle. She has come up through that division. She's a fantastic and able administrator, and one of her priorities, and a shared priority with Secretary Thompson, and certainly as well with Governor Evers, is diversity for us is strength. A diversity of perspectives and backgrounds just kind of intrinsically gives you better, more informed decisions. And so we've been looking at modifying our recruitment program to be able to recruit from a more diverse talent pool. It's hard, it's challenging, because traditionally, engineering has tended to be, dominated by white males. Thankfully, that's starting to change somewhat, but we need to make sure that we are going beyond just visiting at Platteville, Madison, and Milwaukee to recruit engineers. We're sending people to do recruiting and doing outreach to historically Black colleges and universities, looking to expand the types of universities that we go to. We've got some programs that have been stood up to. We have a program called DBE, which is Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, that looks to have a certain amount. We have goals that we need to meet to have a certain amount of our contract dollars go out to women or minority-owned businesses. And we've done a lot of work to get better compliance from the industry with their efforts to meet those goals. Unfortunately, when our administration came in in 2019, Wisconsin unfortunately led in what they call good faith waivers. These are waivers that that would be given for on contracts that did not meet their DBE goals. And so that had to change. We not just led the nation, but we led significantly. So we did a lot of work, sometimes tough work with the industry to change how they would engage with DBE firms and the accountability that they would receive for not meeting those goals. And I think we're now on a good path. We've seen a significant reduction in the amount of good faith waivers that we've seen. That we've stood up some programs for trying to reach out with the tribes across Wisconsin to pull people in, not just in engineering, but within construction work, to get people who are interested involved in a apprenticeship, and so that there's greater representation from the tribes. And there's a fair amount of road work that happens on reservations and whatnot, that there's certainly the talent pool there. There are a number of issues that we have to overcome, but no, there are, that's all well and good, but we need to keep improving our diversity and our culture within the department itself as well. And that's been a priority area. It's not always easy work. You don't see change overnight, and it's unfortunate that we've got the political climate that we do now, because sometimes when you're trying to do good work, it often gets mischaracterized and vilified. So that's just to say we need to advance this work in a smart way that doesn't subject us to unwarranted, baseless attack. I think it's probably the most polite way I can put that.
And for everybody in the chat, Wendy has put in 2 links, one to the diversity, equity and inclusion page off of the Wisconsin DOT website, and also a link to the budget page for the Wisconsin DOT. So nice collaboration there. So
Now, I mentioned that Rebecca was the head of our largest division, but really the division administrators are where a lot of the work gets done at the department. As you know, they're the real leaders of the department, and Rebecca is in charge of our largest division, but the gender split between we have equal representation for division administrators. Some of our very key positions we're beginning to look more like society does, and so that's moving in the right way.
Joel, we've actually kept you longer than what we had you scheduled for. Is there anything that you want to say as a wrap up before I go on to what we're going to be dealing with for next week?
No, I think I've really enjoyed the conversation. This is such thoughtful questions. It was really a treat for me to be able to visit with you all this Sunday morning. So, thank you very much for inviting me. And Wendy, thanks for making this happen. I apologize it didn't work for the first date or so, but I've personally enjoyed this time. So I hope you found it informative. And if you have any follow-up questions or have a specific area that you're interested in, we are at your disposal to answer questions, or most likely get you to somebody who's smarter and more knowledgeable than myself to get you some details or whatnot. But just want to say my thanks and thanks for your attention and such great questions.
Well, and Joel, thank you. FYI, this will be put on the church's YouTube channel. So if you want or would like to see how you look, do so. But for next week, we'll be going over our annual budget for the church. So we'll be doing kind of what we as a church are going to be doing in terms of planning and thinking and looking forward to seeing what the council has recommended for the congregation to vote on. So in some ways, the processes you identified and worked through will be talked about for next week, and we'll be having our presenters doing that. So again, thank you, sir. If you would like to, you could certainly put your contact information into the chat.
Sure.
If there is follow-up questions, people could then get in touch with you.
Sure.
That would be wonderful. And again, thank you, Joel. Appreciate your thoughtful answers and the way that you worked your way through all of the different issues. So
it was
a delight.
It was my pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity. I'll type in my I want to make sure I get this right, but there.
Okay. And if in the future you wish to partake in one of our adult forums as a participant or as an observer, you certainly would be welcome. So,
all right. Well, thank you very much. I hope everybody has a wonderful Sunday.
okay. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Please be safe for this week, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys next week. I'm going to stop the recording.